Well, it became obvious very quickly how many police officers were there. It didn't take very long at all for most people to realise that the police really did intend to stop us going to Stonehenge. The instant reaction of most people was, OK then, let's go back to Savernake, because it was a very beautiful place and we'd all spent a very happy evening the night before there, and we thought, well, OK then, let's go back to Savernake and have the festival there. There were a few people who would have still liked to have gone to Stonehenge, but that didn't necessarily mean no matter what did they want to go to Stonehenge. All of us would still have liked to have gone, but most of us knew almost very quickly that that was not on, and that there was no way we would get to Stonehenge that particular day anyway. A lot of people were actually saying, we'll go anywhere, we'll leave Wiltshire, we'll leave southern England, we'll go anywhere if you let us go. But certainly the reaction of 99% of the people in the field was, OK then, we'll not go to Stonehenge, we'll go somewhere else. We'll turn back and go back the way we've come. And therefore, when we were actually contained in the field and weren't allowed to do this, that people felt very angry and very frustrated because they could not see why we should not be allowed just to get in our vehicles and drive away. At 7 o'clock, I was actually sitting in our truck with the two other people who were with us, Gareth and Steve. Tash came running over to the truck at the point the police charged into the field and shouted at us to get out of the truck, which we did very quickly. And we just stood beside, we walked round to the back of the truck. We were parked right down on the grass field by the fence of the Beanfield. And so when we got out of the truck, we stood by the fence so we could see, had a good view of both of the fields and what was happening in them. We witnessed a lot of the vehicles driving through into the Beanfield to try and escape. They just shot off in a long line across the field, obviously looking for the way out on the other side of the field. And when it became apparent that they couldn't do that, they drove back towards the grass field and just ended up driving round and round and round in circles in the Beanfield. Obviously lots of police officers were in the field throwing everything they could find at the vehicles, smashing the windows, trying to stop the vehicles as best as they could. We stood watching this for 2 or 3 minutes, and it seemed like hours at the time, but during that time I became very frightened and burst into tears because I could see what was happening to all my friends in the Beanfield itself and in those that had gone on in the buses and driven away. And so all the four of us huddled together, really very frightened and watching what was going on around us. And we moved away from the truck and away from the Beanfield and turned to face the other way and look up the grass field because it was too distressing to watch what was going on in the Beanfield. And I was still crying at this time. Then we saw a whole bunch of police officers jumping on the top of somebody a few yards off to our right, and he was on the ground, and there was just this huddle of policemen standing around him with arms and truncheons and legs, and just this whole huddle of people. Well, I screamed at Tash, oh God, look at him, and Tash started to run off to try and do something with his first aid bag, but at that point I panicked and shouted him to come back to me because I didn't want him to leave me standing on my own in the field. At the point he arrived back on my side, he put his arm round me, and at that point 4 police officers walked up to the 4 of us. Gareth, who was the smallest one of us, he's 5'4" or something, quite small, and all 4 police officers rushed at him first because he was the smallest one among us. 2 of them got him by the arm and threw him to the ground and had his arm twisted up behind his back. And then one of those 2 officers left him, and the 3 arrested the other 3 of us. But in fact, the point at which me and Tash were arrested, the officers never actually spoke to us. It was quite obvious to us that we were under arrest, though they didn't actually say so. They just literally walked up to us. One police officer took Tash by his other arm, the one he hadn't got round me on this side, and started to lead us up the field. And another officer stood behind me, slightly to my right, behind me, and I just assumed he was arresting me. Me and Tash turned to his arresting officer, and Tash said, "Are we under arrest?" And he said, "Yes." And then Tash said, "Well, what for?" And the police officer said, "Oh, I don't know really." He said, "I've no idea what I'm arresting you for. I've just been told to come in this field and arrest somebody." And with that, took Tash by the arm and marched us off up the field. And my arresting officer stayed slightly behind me to my right the entire time and marched. He didn't touch me, he didn't speak to me, he made no communication with me at all. I was just assuming I was under arrest, and he led us off out of the field and up onto the road to join the queue of people waiting to be taken away to the police station. It turns out now, I didn't realise it at the time, but I was in fact the last person to be processed in Amesbury police station that night, and was the last one down as having been through. But in fact, being one of the first that was arrested at 7 o'clock meant that we were among the people that spent the most time in the garages round the back, and it was indeed a long time. We were there from probably 8 o'clock in the evening till well into 2 or 3 o'clock following morning. So we were in the garages 6 or 7 hours, which is quite a long time to be kept standing waiting in the freezing cold. And that is the point at which we were strip searched too, so it was a most uncomfortable time really.
What charges were made against you and what was their outcome?
Oh, I was charged with unlawful assembly, along with most other people, and that charge stuck for a few months. It wasn't until, I think it was 2 months later, I'm not sure, when we went to court that those charges were dropped and they were substituted for, they've substituted the obstruction of the police instead. And it was another 18 months after that before those charges were dropped. So in actual fact, we were facing charges for nearly 2 years afterwards. But in the end, all charges were dropped against us. No of it, we didn't get as far as going to court.
Do you think that there might have been political reasons for the police operation? And if so, what threat do you think the travellers posed to the establishment?
Oh, the travellers posed an enormous threat to the establishment. That's of course what it was all about in the first place. There was no other reason for it. Stonehenge was just the excuse. They knew how strongly we all felt about Stonehenge and knew that was a good reason. But the real reason was the threat to the state. As I said, the growth of people, the numbers of people was doubling every year. For 4 years, well, that was a huge number of people that was suddenly flocking into buses or whatever and living on the road. And the festival itself, once it became to be a month long, it functioned perfectly well. It had its own economy, it had its own system for everything, and was so successful in that sense that it must have been a huge threat to the state. It was anarchy in action, and it worked, and it was seen to be working, and it was seen to be working by so many people that they wanted to do it too and wanted to be a part of it. I remember several of us standing on Stonehenge Festival site in 1984 and looking across the festival site at this huge mass of people and standing there and saying, how much longer are the state going to put up with this? We can't see how this is going to continue. And of course we were proved right the following year. The first few years after the Beanfield, I can't actually believe I went to a festival for at least 2 or 3 years after the Beanfield, because the state, by their action that day, had in fact really done what they wanted to. They frightened off a lot of the festival goers who used to come to the festivals and support it, and therefore the travellers had no means of making their living anymore, through the festival scene and their cafes or whatever they were doing. And for several, I'd say for at least 2 or 3 years afterwards, that this situation continued, and travellers found it very, very difficult to actually have festivals and make a way of life and a living for themselves, because people were so frightened. They'd seen what had happened that day on the television and thought, no, I'm not going to a festival, that is what is going to happen to me. And it did have a detrimental effect on the festivals and people's living for that reason.
What this trial is about is claims for false imprisonment, assault and damage to property, and the main issues are, were the police entitled to make the arrests that they did make on the 1st of June 1985, particularly the arrests of these 26 plaintiffs? If they were, did they use unlawful force in making those arrests? And did they commit acts of unlawful damage to people's vehicles and property, both at the time of the arrests and later?
Superstar! You sussed it, look! didn't get us either.
Well, it was the first thing I thought of when I was released from custody on the Monday morning afterwards, that something had to be done about what had happened to us. So the 31st of May 1988 was the last possible day we could issue the writ. Well, it was sometime in May that year that the Legal Aid, the Law Society, responded to our application for legal aid and told us that they were refusing us and withholding the legal aid, and that we could not take this action as a result. The reason they gave was that there was, on 2 counts I think, one was that there was insufficient evidence for us to bring the case in the first place, and that therefore we stood little chance of getting anywhere in the courtroom. And the second was that it wasn't in the public interest for us to sue the police at this particular moment. However, our solicitors obviously went to appeal against the idea that we should not have the legal aid. Luckily it didn't reach the point of having to go into the court for the appeal, because the Law Society saw their error of their ways pretty quickly and gave us the legal aid within a couple of days. And the writs were issued, I think, between 2 and 3 days before the deadline, before the final date that they could have been issued. So the obstacle, that first obstacle, we only just overcame in time.
What, Brian?
Hang on, let me think what I'm going to say.
Let me give her time.
In court itself, the trial itself, I had mixed feelings about when we started. I was very hopeful that, having got that far, that this was a good sign and that we were standing more and more chance of actually succeeding in our claim.
At the moment, the jury are considering their verdicts on allegations of strip searches. They're still to consider... Right, oh, I've got it wrong, I'll do it again. They'll then consider claims for wrongful imprisonment and damage to property. Right, that's it. Okay?
Yeah.
At the moment, the jury are considering verdicts on allegations of strip searches. They'll then assess... Consider claims. I think it's right.
And during the course of the trial, and after having seen the jury in the court, and the fact that there was a jury there sort of encouraged me even more to feel that maybe justice was about to be done, and that we were finally going to be able to have something done about what had happened to us in that day in the Beanfield.
Now the problem arose when the jury answered the first question about the intentions of the convoy at the beginning of the day in favour of the police, and the last question, and some of the earlier ones, about the intentions of the convoy later in the day in favour of the plaintiffs. But the judge wouldn't accept that verdict. And so eventually he said that he would pose another question to the jury.
And the way the questionnaire was written was, quite frankly, it was very much against us right from the word go. Our lawyers tried to change it, but they didn't succeed that well. They couldn't get the judge to clarify matters, and it was left so open that the judge was able to make the decision that he wanted to. The final question that clinched ours, question number 12, was, did members of the convoy still wish to force their way to Stonehenge at 7 o'clock in the evening?
And he put the jury in a terrible quandary. And the jury showed that they were in the quandary by sending a message to the judge saying, we are puzzled by the words members of the convoy. Does it mean all the members, or a few of the members, or a section of the convoy? And the judge had them in, and he said that it means any significant number. In a sense, anything more than 2 or 3. And that explains why, in the final result, the jury answered the question, yes, the police did reasonably believe that members of the convoy, some members of the convoy, still wanted to make trouble. And once they said that, the judge said, well, automatically, they're entitled to arrest everybody, and therefore the plaintiff's claim has failed, all of them. So that was it, and I wouldn't, in fact, I know full well that it leaves a very sour taste in the mouth of both the jury and the plaintiffs, because they feel that they secured the verdict of the jury on the questions as they were put, with everyone's agreement, then the judge changed the goalposts.
It's the only way that I feel I've had any recompense for what happened that day was the fact that I have been allowed publicly to stand up and say, no, this is how it is. This was what happened from my point of view, and give my own personal views on it. If I could say that the Beanfield and what happened to me that day was the worst day of my life, and I can't ever foresee having anything happen to me that could be worse than what happened to us there that day, then I can say that that day that I had in the witness box must be my best day of my life as a contrast, because it was such a good feeling to be able to stand up in public and say, no, this is how it happened, this is what happened to me, I'm telling the truth. And that did make me feel good. And we couldn't just sit there and take it. You know, we weren't going to sit back and just have them destroy our lifestyle. We'd worked so hard over the years to establish ourselves and become part of, you know, almost try to become part of society again by saying this can be a normal way of life. This, you know, there is nothing wrong with the way we want to live, please accept us. And we felt that we were in a way just beginning to reach that point with the wider society. And obviously the police and the state tried to stop us, and it was for that reason that I personally took action, because I wasn't going to sit back and let them take my lifestyle away from me that easily, irrespective of the rights and the wrongs of the actual issues on that day. Though obviously I felt the police were very wrong to have done what they did. But it wasn't that made me sue them, it was the fact that I wasn't sitting back and taking it. I'm a fighter.
Drove into Happy Valley seeking peace and love, with a lone helicopter hanging up above. We didn't realize until we hit the field there were 400 causes holding riot shields. They terrorized our babies and they broke our heads. It's a stone fucking miracle there's no one dead. They turned my ramshackle home into a burning wreck. My one-eyed dog got a broken neck. Slow down, itinerant child. The road is full of danger. Slow down, itinerant child. There's no more welcome stranger. Slow down, itinerant child. You're still accelerated. Slow down, itinerant child.